Washington Journal continues.
We want to welcome Alfonso Aguilar. He is with the American Principles in Action, serving as the Latino Partnership Director, and he's the former chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship, serving from 2003 until 2008 during the George W. Bush administration. Good morning. Thanks very much for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Big issue in this campaign, and yet Republicans have yet to solidify any sort of clarity when it comes to immigration. What do you expect to happen as this campaign unfolds?
Well, look, I'm an optimist. I think the Republican Congress understands that the American people, not only Latino voters, want Congress to deal with the toughest issues that face the nation, and certainly immigration is one of them. And they should do it because of policy reasons, because it's important that we address this issue. We have a dysfunctional immigration system. We can't continue with 11 million people living in the shadows with a border that's far from secure. So we need to face this issue. And on the other point is political. It would be very difficult for a Republican nominee to get enough Latino voter support to win the White House if the congressional Republicans don't do anything on immigration.
I want to share with you a poll that came out a couple of months ago. It's available online at WashingtonPost.com. But as you look at the breakdown of how Democrats and Republicans view the issue of immigration, 70% of those self-identified Republicans say they oppose any path to citizenship. 7-0.
Right, but the problem is that with this issue, it has been oversimplified, mainly by Democrats, saying that the issue is about a path to citizenship, and that's not true. The majority of Republicans don't oppose a path to legal status, bringing people out of the shadows. And the important thing is to give them a legal status, but not necessarily a special path to citizenship. And that's what we're talking about. Republicans, the majority of Republicans, are not saying, you know, let's close the door to citizenship. But if you want to become a citizen, you would have to follow the path established by current law, which means that you would have to get to the back of the line, not cutting in line. So the question here is really not the path to citizenship, but we shouldn't give them a special path to citizenship. And that's what Democrats are proposing, some sort of entitlement, that we would pass a law that would guarantee that people reach citizenship. And there are a lot of people waiting outside of the country for many, many years to enter legally as immigrants and eventually become citizens. And it will be very unfair to them. Now, if you look at polling, for the majority of Latino voters, the most important thing is for people to come out of the shadows, not a path to citizenship. So that, I think, is what Republicans are proposing. Let me tell you, if Republicans were to propose a bill that would provide a legalization program, a path to legal status short of citizenship, I think the majority of Latino voters, the majority of the immigrant community, will respond very favorably to that proposal.
If you're one of those individuals, we have a special number set aside to call it 202-748-8003. President George W. Bush proposed something very similar. It failed because Republicans in Congress didn't want that.
Well, you know, it failed for many reasons. Not only Republicans, you're absolutely right. Look, both parties are to blame here. Both parties have played political football with the issue. Let's not forget that during that process, during that debate in 2007, even Senator Obama introduced poison pill amendments to kill the immigration bill that was being discussed. There were Democrats that didn't want President Bush to get the credit for passing immigration reform. I think they're good actors in both parties. But politics is the art of the possible, and we need to create a consensus. The only way we're going to solve this issue is not through unilateral executive action that doesn't resolve anything. You know, the president's executive action is stuck in the courts. What we need is to build consensus among Republicans and Democrats with a plan that addresses all the different issues of the immigration problem. And that's what my organization has proposed in the past weeks, a framework to move forward in this Congress to deal with this issue so we can move forward.
But Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, did put together that framework and then essentially walked away from it. I want to share with you what he said in an interview with Chris Wallace on the Fox News channel, asked about his own legislation and why he changed his views.
Problem is the votes aren't there in the House. In fact, as you know, for example, the majority leader of the House partially lost his election on the perception that he was in favor of immigration reform, and that impacted the way others voted as well. So clearly, leaders stand for the idea that you need to do something, but you also have to deal with the reality that in the political process, people are going to vote based on what they're hearing from their constituents and others. And that's what I'm basically saying, is the votes are not there for comprehensive immigration reform. And at this stage, after 2 illegal executive orders, after a migratory crisis on the border with minors last summer, the context in which we're having this debate is much different. If we want to move forward on immigration, the first thing we're going to have to do is prove to the American people that future illegal immigration is under control.
Your response?
Well, I would agree with him. You know, I was part of the effort to push an immigration bill through the Senate. I actually, when the Gang of Eight announced the Senate bill, I was there standing behind them to provide support. But I remember clearly Senator Rubio, when he announced that plan, and he met with conservative leaders saying, this is not perfect, this is going to have to be fixed in the House. I'm supporting this because we have to start a debate. And at that time, that was the only bill that could get out of a Democratic Senate. I don't think Marco Rubio has changed his views on immigration. What he has changed and modified, which is necessary, is his strategy on how to push the issue forward. And he's absolutely right. I think at this point in this Congress, the only way we're going to move this issue forward is if we deal with the issue of border security, of enforcement of the law domestically, and then we can move to the issue of the undocumented immigrants and creating a guest worker program to facilitate the flow of the migrant workers that we need. But, you know, it can't be done in one comprehensive package. It has to be done through a piecemeal approach by passing sequentially several bills. And it can be done by this Congress. It doesn't mean that Republicans would oppose any form of legalization. But again, I go back to what I said earlier. I think the issue has been oversimplified, and I think Marco Rubio helps to put some context into the debate.
One other headline from the New York Times from May 28th, its first draft morning blog saying Republicans lurching to the right on immigration. And I mention this because after the 2012 election, Republicans said, you know what, we're going to fix the system so that we can be a player in 2016. Here we are in 2015 and still nothing. Well,
to me it was very frustrating that Republicans didn't do anything in the House in the last Congress. I agree with that. I think there are some candidates like Scott Walker, like Senator Santorum, who've come out already with positions on immigration that sound restrictionist, not very supportive of the concept of immigration as something that helps economic growth. But I would say you have candidates like Marco Rubio, like Governor Bush, like Governor Perry, even Ted Cruz, who believe in immigration as something essential for economic growth in our country. But again, the problem that we have in our country is that this issue of immigration has been oversimplified. Democrats are good on the issue, Republicans are bad. And that's absolutely not true. What we need is a common sense approach. And as I've said, there are good actors in both parties, and what we need is to build consensus. That's why my organization proposed a plan that looks at securing the border, ensuring that we enforce the law domestically, and then we can move forward with legalizing undocumented immigrants, not provide a special path to citizenship, but not closing the door to citizenship, and then creating a guest worker program, which ironically Obama and the Democrats oppose. And this, how can you have, you know, even when we talk about a comprehensive immigration reform, what is comprehensive immigration reform? Any type of reform that does not contain a market-based guest worker program, which most conservatives support, which would manage the flows of the migrant workers that our economy needs, is not comprehensive. So I would argue that Democrats generally don't support a comprehensive approach.
This from George Monroe. You can share your tweet at C-SPAN WJ. He says the following: Republicans control Congress. Why can't they propose an immigration bill? Question mark. Danny joining us from Yuma, Arizona, Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning. First, I'd like to state that growing up along the border, I understand that there is a huge amount of revenue generated by the illegal acts that take place across the border regarding immigrants, regarding drugs, and other illegal acts. I realize that there's a lot of revenue generated that helps support a lot of our systems throughout, you know, from the prosecution all the way up to corrections. But we have a huge amount of people who have been busted, law enforcement and legal people, and you name it, who have been busted. The feds have busted them on stuff, and they were given immunity. The charges were dismissed. We have a judge who was busted a few years ago, and rather than prosecute him, it went quiet, and he's sitting on the bench. And it's really a shame that they're not enforcing the laws along the border like they should be. It seems that money, revenue is the key concern here, because some time ago we put in a request for a permit to hold a social function at the sand dunes near here, and we talked to some people that work in Homeland Security, and they told us that the corruption rate along the border is 79%. Now, that was about 5 years ago, and we do know that oftentimes they catch people getting payoffs. They're using Border Patrol or the Sheriff's Department, and back then we're also involved in manipulating traffic so that illegal, loads of stuff came across the border. Nothing's been done about this, and it's protected. What's being done about the corruption on our border?
Thank you for the call, Danny.
Well, that's a very good point. It is very difficult to do anything, and I agree with you when there's a perception that the border's not being secured. If you look at the Texas sector of the border, particularly the Rio Grande Valley sector, most undocumented immigrants are coming illegally through that sector. Last year, we had over 450,000 illegal entries, apprehensions, detentions through the southern border, and over 330,000 of those came through the Rio Grande Valley. We don't have operational control over the Rio Grande Valley sector. What has the administration done? Nothing. So how can you have a serious debate when you're not doing enough to secure the border? Has border security improved? Absolutely. I'm willing to accept that. I remember in 2000, we had up to 1 million detentions, apprehensions along the southern border. It's gone down to 440. But if we take control, operational control of the Rio Grande Valley sector, I can guarantee you that that number is going to decrease dramatically. So, but I'm not saying this is a either-or proposition, because Republicans have been boxed in this false choice. You either support Obama's amnesty or Mitt Romney's self-deportation. What I'm proposing is that we secure the border in an effective way, and the best way to do it that I know of is not by coming up with theoretical measures, but actually doing something concrete. And I think extending double-layer fencing in key parts of the border where illegal entry is possible would dramatically reduce the number of illegal entries. Now, once we do that, then we can look at bringing people out of the shadows and, again, creating a market-based guest worker program which goes to the root of the immigration problem. And sadly, most Democrats oppose. Are they really for immigration reform? I doubt.
To the caller's point from Arizona, this is a piece that I want to direct your attention to from Time Magazine, out this past week, also available online. The title of the essay, The Other Border, and photographs by Alex Altman. Undocumented immigrants are dying in large numbers as they try to evade road checkpoints in Texas counties north of the U.S.-Mexico border. Here are some additional photographs, including the remains of the bodies of some of those who were found along the border. And then one more photograph, again, courtesy of Time Magazine. Let's go to Jimmy, joining us from Brunswick, Georgia. Our line for illegal immigrants. Good morning.
Good morning. The purpose of my call, wow, there's so many areas I can go, but what I mainly want to speak to is this former government official who worked in the immigration business. How do you get to the number of 11 million illegal immigrants in the country? Number one, first of all, one of the big champions of illegal immigration in this country is a guy from Univision TV named Jorge Ramos. Just about 2 years ago, he was always using the figure of 20 to 30 million. Then at some point, Mr. Luis Gutierrez came out with the number 11 million or 10 million. We have no idea of how many they are. And I wonder, why don't we first have some sort of a census, a special census for people who are in the country, knowingly in the country illegally? we get them to come out and participate in this census, register with the government. When we get that number firm and we know how many they are, then we start thinking about how we either help them to become legal or help them to return to the countries they came from and be on a list where later on they can be considered by our various consulates.
I'm going to stop you there so I have time for a response. Thank you, Jimmy.
Well, I mean, I agree. When I mentioned 11 million, that number, Luis Gutierrez didn't come up with that number. That's a number that it's managed by law enforcement, by different research organizations. I don't think anybody's saying that for sure is a number. It could be less. It could certainly be more. We just don't know. I agree with you. However, the idea of a census is just not realistic. How can you poll the population of undocumented immigrants if they don't know what's going to happen with them? Do you really think that they're going to come forward to a government agency to do a poll if they don't know what's going to happen, if they don't know they're going to be detained and removed from the country? It doesn't work that way. Look, I'm not happy that we have so many undocumented immigrants in the country, but the reality is that they're not coming here looking for handouts or to have children here, as some people say. They're coming here because they want to work. They want to improve their condition, their living standards for themselves and for their relatives. The majority of them, believe it or not, don't want to stay here permanently. They would like to go back. And you know, we need them because there are jobs that Americans don't want to do or for which we don't have Americans of working age to do them. So we need to have a mechanism to allow those people to come here legally, work, return to their home country so they don't stay here permanently, and they'd be able to re-enter, incorporate the concept of circular migration, which is based on principles of the market, conservative principles. And I'm saying only let them come in if American businesses can prove that they cannot hire American workers. However, there's also this idea, and we heard it from some candidates, particularly Governor Walker, following the disposition that Senator Sessions of Alabama has, that immigrants are taking jobs away from Americans or depressing wages. That is an absolute fallacy. They are taking niche jobs that nobody is going after. And by taking those jobs, they help create jobs upstream in the labor market, better paying jobs. So for those who say that immigration hurts the middle class, to the contrary, immigration helps create good paying jobs for Americans. So beware of those who tell you that we can't allow more even legal immigrants to come in because that's going to hurt the middle class. More people in an economy means an expanded consumer base, more economic activity. Immigrants, economists like to say that they have a complementary role with American workers. They complement the skills of American workers, creating better paying jobs for Americans. So that is the root of the problem. But right now, we're discussing two alternatives that are not realistic. On one hand, just secure the border and enforce the law, or promote self-deportation, and on the other, just provide a path to citizenship to undocumented immigrants. I put forward that those two alternatives are extreme alternatives that won't resolve the problem. We need a common sense approach, and I think this Republican Congress, this conservative Congress, can actually pass a series of bills that begins putting our dysfunctional immigration system into order.
Our topic, immigration and the 2016 campaign, and this is from Peg, who says the country is divided between immigration mess and the deportation of 11 million, period. So here's a summary of what the American Principles in Action is calling for. In essence, what Alfonso Aguilar is saying, that we need to, quote, secure the border. We need to enforce immigration law at the workplace to fully implement the entry and the exit registry. Also ensure employers can hire foreign workers if needed, and provide a path to legal status for undocumented immigrants. And that's the key, legal status.
Correct. Let's
go to Stephen from Hastings, Florida. Democrats line, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I've been trying for a long time, but this is my first time. I think to have a very simple solution to Social Security, Medicare, and immigration. If you think about this, it's very simple. The greatest generation is dying or dead. They can't contribute anything else. They did everything they could. Thank God. The baby boomers, they're aging out of the workplace. We have millions of people here that if they only were to come out of the shadows, were giving some sort of ability to work, because they are consuming. And you know, the American Revolution was started because there was taxation without representation. These people pay tax. These people pay tax, and every time they eat, every time they buy food, every time they go to a restaurant, every time. The only difference is they're not being represented. So how could you, a Republican, think that you could be taxing people for whatever way that you do, anyways being taxed, and not being represented? I mean, how could you have, in 4 years, somebody say that they should deport themselves to their own country of origin, and in 4 years try to change back and say that, yes, we want the Hispanics? You're never going to get the Hispanics. That's why you don't want to give them a path to citizenship.
Thank you, Stephen.
You know, that's a nice talking point, but it doesn't work. You know, I'm continuously talking to immigrant and Latino communities throughout the country, and, you know, what they're looking for is to come out of the shadows. Under Reagan's immigration reform, the last big immigration reform, about 3 million people were given amnesty, and that was amnesty. You know how many of those actually became citizens? 40%. Look, I'm not saying that people who come out of the shadows and are legalized cannot become citizens. So understand this well, because there's a lot of confusion that actually Hillary Clinton is helping create. What I'm saying is, let's legalize them, let's give a path to legal status, but that if they want to become citizens, they would have to follow the current process established by law. Do you disagree with that? I mean, I'm not saying, no, you can't become a citizen. I'm just saying you can follow the rules, because there are many people waiting outside of the country to enter here as immigrants and become citizens. So this is very important, and this is, I think, the Achilles tendon of the Democratic argument. They really think that Latinos are so dumb that they're going to buy this argument that, you know, Republicans are just against a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. They're against a special path. Now, let me agree with him in saying that we do have a population issue. And it's not that the U.S. is overpopulated, but that birth rates are going down. And that's why there are jobs that are not being filled by Americans. You know, when Senator Sessions, who's actually now sounding like a big labor liberal, says that more immigrants means depressed wages, apparently he hasn't reviewed our history. When we had the baby boom, when we had birth rates were high in the country, jobs were, the job creation skyrocketed, good paying jobs with high wages. You know when wages start coming down and this income inequality that we see started expanding? When birth rates went down. So this idea that less people is good, that people are pollution, the Malthusian idea that inspires a lot of these restrictionist groups like the Center for Immigration Studies, FAIR, Numbers USA, and apparently now Senator Sessions, who knew, sounds like a liberal now, I think it's wrong. I believe in Reagan's view of America, of an expanding economy that is open and free, that can receive people from any corner of the world and incorporate them into our economy and expand. And that's what he talked about in his farewell speech to the nation, when he talked about the shining city of the hill, on the hill as a city teeming with people, open, with commerce, that thrived and received anyone from any corner of the world that came here to work. So why are we against that? And let me tell you, that President Obama and Senator Sessions agree that we shouldn't allow more foreign workers to come in, believe it or not.
To our listeners on C-SPAN Radio, which is heard nationwide on XM Channel 120, our guest is Alfonso Aguilar. He is now with the American Principles in Action Latino Partnership Director, which is a mouthful, basically looking at the 2016 issue of immigration. Also, he served as the chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship during the Bush administration. Fred is joining us from Huntsville, Alabama. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve. Thanks. I've been waiting for a while, so give me about 5 extra seconds. I want to talk about two words, sovereignty and loyalty. If a nation loses its sovereignty, it is no longer a nation. These people broke the number one law of our land is our sovereignty. They came across our borders, whether they physically came here or they overstayed a visa. If you're not legally here in America, you need to go where you came from or leave the country. I agree with the Republicans on this. And what I want to say about loyalty is the way I hear a lot of these Hispanic Americans who are supposed to be Americans clamoring and campaigning for the people from those other countries, I question their loyalty. So if your loyalties are somewhere else, I don't care if it's south of our border or Jerusalem or wherever, then that's where you need to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
My friend, I think you go the wrong route when you start questioning the loyalty of U.S. citizens of Hispanic origin. During the Iraq War, and I served 8 years in the Bush administration, we had 40,000 permanent residents, immigrants, the majority of Hispanic origin, serving in the armed forces, many in Iraq. Did you know, probably don't, that the first casualty in Iraq was a permanent resident, a Guatemalan? You know, this is a reality. They're not even citizens, and they're actually wanting to put themselves in harm's way to defend the rights that we cherish. Look, I agree that they broke the law, but our Constitution is based on the idea that the penalties that we impose on people are not extreme. If they've broken the law, and by the way, that's not a crime under federal law, the penalty should be proportional. Let's have them pay a good fine, a heavy fine, so they understand that they broke the law, and let them come forward. But the idea that the only way to fix this is by deporting them is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, there's no way that we can deport 11 million or more undocumented immigrants. And let me tell you something. The Republicans, again, what you're saying about Republicans is a generalization that is not true. Steve King, Senator Sessions don't represent the majority of Republicans in Congress. I think they want to lead, and I am hopeful that perhaps even in this Congress, we may be able to get something done. But I agree, however, that if Republicans remain silent, because when I meet in Congress with senators, with members of Congress, I realize they want to do something. But if they don't come forward and do something, introduce legislation, then there's going to be the perception out there that Republicans don't want to do something. And that's why we put together this plan, to actually encourage members to do something, give them conservative arguments to deal with the issue, and pass legislation. Look, if Democrats want to oppose this, let them oppose it. But they would have to explain to Latino voters that they opposed a bill that would secure the border, enforce the law, and legalize undocumented immigrants.
You worked for President George W. Bush. Will you endorse somebody, and are you advising Jeb Bush?
Well, you know, at this point, I'm not endorsing anyone. I'm talking to several Republican candidates, including Governor Bush. Certainly, Governor Bush understands this issue better than the other candidates. I think he's written a book on this issue, and I think what he articulates in his book, Immigration Wars, which is a great read, is consistent with the plan that I've articulated. I think we have a better chance of getting immigration reform done, if it's not done in this Congress, with a Jeb Bush in the White House than with Hillary Clinton. But then again, I'm saying Marco Rubio also has articulated a plan that is consistent with what we have proposed. Governor Perry certainly understands the importance of securing the border, but then creating a good guest worker program to resolve this issue. And also Senator Rand Paul has said that the GOP needs to deal with immigration. So I'm hopeful that the narrative on immigration in this cycle, it's going to be much more positive than 4 years ago, and that candidates are going to avoid the self-deportation moment of Mitt Romney. There are exceptions. Senator Santorum is one of them. I don't know how far he's going to go with his candidacy, and certainly of the top-tier candidates, Governor Walker has really flip-flopped on the issue, and his last statement saying that immigration, even legal immigration, could lead to depressed wages for American workers is just not based on reality. It makes me think that he doesn't understand the issue very well.
I want to come back to that point, but first let's go to John joining us from Sebring, Florida, Republican line. Good morning with Alfonso Aguilar. You're next.
How you doing? I got a comment about C-SPAN before I get my question. I'm in my middle 70s, and I pulled 8 years in the military protecting this country and our borders against illegal people coming in here and fighting the wars that we had. And we are so sick of you C-SPAN putting these illegal aliens a phone number on there for something that our cable and dish satellites pay your wages, and they've got no business. They broke in our country. They're taking all the jobs like this guy don't agree on, and he's sitting there lying like a dog. And we are so sick of these people. I got grandkids and kids that can't get a job for them. All you got to do is go up the freeways, the interstates, and that's all they got working there except a couple of white-hat Americans.
Okay.
Okay, now my comment.
Well, let me just respond to your earlier comment. The reason why we did that is that certainly they are part of the conversation, and often you can learn from their perspective just like we're learning from your perspective, and that's really what this program is all about. So that's why we include all voices and all points of view on this program. But please go ahead, John.
This hiding in the shadows, this is a bunch of garbage too, because they're everywhere in this country. They won't arrest them. They do all the crimes. They don't do anything. Obama won't arrest none of them. He tell them not to. I've seen this. I've rode with the sheriff in my community. And this guy, he says they don't come over here for the benefits. Well, if they don't come for the benefits, how about telling them to stay out of our schools and our hospital and quit going through Walmart with all their food stamp cards?
We'll get a response.
Wow. I mean, the problem with what he's saying, and it's typical of a small group of restrictions in the country, and what he's saying is not what the majority of the conservative base believes. The perception is out there that the majority of conservatives think like this gentleman, but he actually represents a small minority. The problem is that they're very powerful. They're the ones calling this show. And they have the support of people like Laura Ingraham, like Michelle Malkin, like Ann Coulter, and they say all the things that are factually not true. For example, he says that they have access to welfare. Well, an undocumented immigrant doesn't have access to welfare, doesn't have access to federal benefits. So I don't know what he's talking about. But ironically, as I've said before, by doing jobs that Americans don't want, they're creating jobs, good-paying jobs, for his nephew or his grandchild or whoever he was talking about. Look, if you don't have, take a restaurant, for example. If you don't have people, when we are here in Washington, D.C., if you visit any restaurant in Washington, D.C., in the kitchens, who are doing the hard jobs, the cleaning jobs, they're immigrants. And I tell you, most are undocumented immigrants. And are they doing them because those restaurants are paying them below the minimum wage or prevailing wage? That's not true. They cannot find American workers. Look at the fields in Alabama, in your state that you're calling from. I don't see, and I've been in your state, and I've met with agribusiness. Where are those Americans lining up to take those jobs to work in the fields? It doesn't happen. And that's why we need this workforce, but we need it legally. So, I think that the question here is, are Republicans going to remain silent, the majority, and I believe that the majority, even conservative Tea Party aligned conservatives, support immigration reform. Are they going to remain silent, or they're going to let these voices like Steve King, like Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter's coming out tomorrow with a book, Adios America, basically arguing that Mexicans cannot be assimilated in America. Just basically saying what restrictionists and nativists would say about Irish and the Italian 100 years ago. They can assimilate, that they throw garbage in the streets. Culture is not something you're born with. It's something you learn and actually can be unlearned. And the great thing about America is that because of our system, based on the rule of law, creates incentives for people to change their habits. In Mexico, it's very difficult to create a business. So that's why a lot of people perhaps depend on government. But when they come here, they become extremely entrepreneurial. Why do you think 20% of businesses today in America are created by Hispanic entrepreneurs, perhaps many immigrants? So I would argue that, is the Republican Party going to let a small minority of nativists who are using hateful language I would say even racist language control this debate. I think it's time for us to reclaim this issue and go back to the vision that Ronald Reagan had of America as a country based on the rule of law, but a country teeming with people that has an open economy, thriving economy.
Who funds Americans' Principles in Action?
Well, we have a number of funders that are committed to promoting the conservative message in different sectors, on education, on monetary policy, which is essential for our economy to begin growing and to end this income inequality that we have, and certainly on immigration. Our donors, we don't like to give their names out. They're committed people, and in this highly political environment, sometimes when you give out the names of people, there are people that actually target them, sadly. So, they're good Americans committed to the rule of law and that believe that America it's going down the wrong path, and that we need to go back to the principles of our founding of small government, of family values, and free trade.
Let's go to David joining us from Denison, Texas, our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Good morning. First, I'd like to say that as a conservative, I'm in favor of great increases in legal immigration. I certainly appreciate what that's done for our country in the past. I understand also that you look at our population growth versus Europe and other parts of the world where their population is going down. Ours is ultimately going up, probably because of immigration. Yeah. That being said, and I also agree with your guest on most everything he's saying. However, I'd like to, and this has nothing to do with what I called about initially, but I'd like to defend that last caller a bit, and I'd like to say that you overstate when you say that he represents such a small slither. I wouldn't agree with necessarily how he expressed all of what he said, but having worked in the hotel industry and management for 20 years, and having kids of my own who can't get lawn jobs. When I grew up, I'm 63. When I grew up, my first jobs were neighborhood lawn jobs. There is no way that you can get a lawn job in this country anymore. I had 3 boys. I tried to put them all 3 into that business. There was no way to compete with the folks that were doing it, and I've hired those crews myself now. I can't. There's no way to compete in the construction industry and in the house and in the hotel industry. I understand what you're saying about having a hard time finding people to do the jobs, but that's because there's so many people that are there to do those that way. And if they tighten up the way that they allow people into those where they require better checks, then believe me, Americans will do any job. I sent my sons. I helped them go up to the oil fields in North Dakota, where they're paying a very high wages up there. I helped bankroll them up there for a month. It's really hard to stay up there because there's no place to be. The company they hired on with ultimately replaced them with illegal immigrant labor that they brought up from their company in Arizona, and they phased them out, and I had to bring them home. This is an issue. It's a real issue. I'm not saying that well, let me get to what I really called about, please, if I could, because I had a question for you because they keep talking about comprehensive immigration reform, and it seems to me that every time anything that's called comprehensive is thrown out there, it's already doomed.
Thank you, David. We'll get a response.
No, I agree with you. I mean, the first point that you make is very valid. I mean, right now, if we care about working Americans, like your kids, we shouldn't be for keeping the system as it is. Because we have 11 million or more illegal in the country, there are irresponsible employers who hire undocumented immigrants because they can pay them less. And now, because they're illegally in the country, they have that competitive advantage over American workers. So let's ensure, and that's part of our plan, that we mandate E-Verify. Because the main reason they're coming here is to work. So if we have an electronic verification system that ensures that employers know that the person that's applying for a job is legally, lawfully authorized to work in the country, that will definitely prevent them from hiring undocumented immigrants. So let's do that. Let's take away that incentive. And a lot of people will not cross the border if they know they can't get a job because this system is in place. It's called E-Verify. Now, if we have if we take out then those illegal immigrants competing unfairly, then I think there'll be an equal playing field where your children will be able to if they want to do landscaping, they will be able to do that work. But let me tell you, going back to the population numbers, the average age of a white American is 41 in the country. You know, you don't find, there are a lot of need for landscapers, and at that age it's very difficult to do that type of work. The same thing with agriculture. That's why immigration is so important. So I think we have to put it objectively, and what you're saying, arguing at the beginning, is a reason for bringing people out of the shadows. Now, we cannot deport them all, so that's why we should impose a heavy fine and let them come forward.
Quick follow-up, based on everything that you've been saying, is it safe to assume that immigration reform will not happen until after the presidential election?
Well, I'm an optimist. I believe that Republicans understand that if they don't do anything, whoever the candidate is, he or she may be handicapped. So I believe that it is possible. Very difficult, but possible. It's still possible that something could be done, even next year in the election year. Again, very difficult. We're going to have to go against the current. Very difficult, but I wouldn't say impossible.
We will conclude on that note. Alfonso Aguilar, who is with the American Principles in Action, serving as the Latino Partnership Director. Sir, thank you very much for being with us.